Good afternoon, folks. It's 1:30 Mountain Time on May 12th. We are recording this conversation about SPS's 2026 Integrated Resource Plan. We're going to give a few minutes. There's a couple of our team members I don't yet see on the participant list, so if you just hold for about a minute, we'll get going here shortly. So thank you for joining us. We'll be back to you here in a moment. Good afternoon. Welcome back. We're going to go ahead and get started with our conversation today. This is Margie Tatro with GridWorks. I'm joined by my colleagues Kathy Boyce and Deborah Shields. We're the facilitators for the Integrated Resource Planning Stakeholder Process for SPS's 2026 IRP. We've organized this office hour to address any questions that folks have since our prior workshop, since workshop number 3. Thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you to some of our stakeholders who have provided some questions to kick off the conversation. We are recording this discussion, and you can listen to the recording by going to the GridWorks website. Also, folks who can't be here today might be interested in listening to some of the responses to questions. So what you can see on the next slide is our objective for today is to respond to questions remaining from workshop 3 and also aiming to help all of us prepare to digest model results that will begin to be shared at our next workshop, workshop 4, which is coming up next week on May 20th. So after this welcome, we will go to questions that were previously submitted by attendees from workshop number 3. And then after we address those questions through conversation from the SPS utility team, we'll take questions on any topic. These 6 topics might be a way to organize our conversation depending on what interests there are from people in attendance. We'll summarize either at 3:25 or earlier if we run out of questions to ask and converse about here today. So with that, let me go to the next slide and show that these are some questions that were turned in at the end of workshop number 3 or after workshop number 3 in order to prepare for this office hour conversation. And I am going to turn the podium over to the SPS team so that they can begin to address these 6 questions. I think ConocoPhillips, Carrie Hatley turned in these questions. So we wanted to start with those. Carrie, hopefully you're here and you can ask follow-up questions to these as the answers come out. And so let me go ahead and turn this over to Jared or Justin, whoever from the SPS team is going to address these 6 questions so we can get going.
All right, thanks, Margie, for the opportunity today. Thanks, everybody, for logging in and joining us for these office hours. As Margie said, the goal is to have an opportunity here today to answer any open questions. We'll work through these previously submitted ones first, and then we do have a number of our subject matter experts online today from our load forecasting team, resource planning. We brought some individuals from our demand response and distribution teams as well. And then we also have key accounts and other groups like that to just be available to answer questions. So, Margie, we kind of put a little deck together that we're going to share. So these questions are slightly reordered, but we'll walk through our responses on that. So, Linda, are you on and able to share your screen, and we'll walk through the questions? Now I will share. All right, Linda is sharing.
Yes, I'm getting there.
You're
Here we
good. You're
go.
good.
Here we go.
Perfect. Um,
Can you see my screen?
we can see your screen. Can you make it
Okay.
full?
Okay, I think it's larger now. Is it?
It is. We're seeing the presenter mode though, so you're seeing the two screens.
Oh, okay.
There you go. First one.
There we go.
Perfect. There we go. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Apologies. We had a little technical difficulty throughout this entire building today. We're recovering though.
All right. Well, so as Margie said, a number of these questions were submitted on behalf of Carrie Hatley. So we're going to walk through these questions in this order. The first question we had was around providing more information around cost and feasibility of front of the meter utility owned distribution level generation and storage. So we have Brian Monson online with us today. He is a director in our distribution organization. And so we're going to kick it over to Brian. Going to provide some feedback and insights in response to this question, Brian.
Hey all, and yeah, thank you for the question related to this. It's a interesting one that's being addressed in some of the other jurisdictions that Xcel Energy operates in, including Colorado and Minnesota. But to directly answer the question, it is possible in some instances for distributed generation and distributed storage to be deployed in a way that they can actually have a benefit for the transmission system or for the bulk system more broadly. But it's not always the case that that's possible. It really depends on a variety of factors that kind of have to fall into place for that to be achievable. So it's more location specific. So some of those factors include, like, for example, if it's non-dispatchable generation, like, for example, solar, there has to be available hosting capacity on the distribution system. And then in addition to that, there has to be some level of coincidence between the timing of when the generator is running and when that would be actually be needed and provide value to the transmission system or the bulk system. But provided that you can get that alignment in certain instances where, keep in mind, every part of the distribution system peaks at a slightly different time. It's really dependent on the customers and the unique customers that make up that part of the system. So in addition to that, there's other factors, including understanding what impacts that could have on the distribution system, right? For example, if you have dispatchable generation or dispatchable storage as a good example of that, the timing of when you charge or discharge the battery, you might be doing that to provide benefit to the transmission system or to the bulk system. But in so doing, depending on what part of the distribution system you're doing that on, you could actually create or exacerbate constraints on the distribution system. So there's a variety of sort of factors that need to fall into place for that to be achievable, but there are certain instances where that is possible. Around cost, we don't have, there's a lot of factors that kind of play into the cost of that, including, how we're actually siting and permitting those resources and getting them onto the system, how we're procuring the land, if we're purchasing land or leasing land, or if we have an easement for siting those resources. All of that kind of play into impacting what the cost is. But ultimately, you would have to do some level of analysis to make sure that deploying distributed resources in this way is cost competitive with the traditional, transmission upgrade or other solution that's identified in the IRP. And then the last thing I'll add here is that there's potential for, sort of real-time operational impacts, particularly with storage. If you're deploying storage on the system, you could either dispatch that on a preset schedule that is closer to like a set it and forget it type of situation, or if you need to dispatch that more dynamically based on responding to grid conditions, you need to have communication capabilities with the equipment. So that would include not just the communication equipment physically in the field, but also having the operational processes in place, like having a DERMS, for example, to relay those dispatch signals. So sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer to the question, but that's some of the factors that kind of play into whether this is a feasible option or not. It's very situational and location specific ultimately.
All right, thanks, Brian. So Margie, I think we're just going to walk through all the questions, and then if we need to circle back, if Carrie Hatley or others have some follow-ups on these questions, and that way we'll kind of keep moving through. Okay. The next one was a question around abundant produced water and within the New Mexico area, and conversations around if Matt could there be uses for that produced water. And so I'm going to kick this one over to Dr. Taylor Moot to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So just real quick, let's run down through kind of what are all the different technologies and what is their kind of water usage. So your CTs and CCs, right? You do use water for those for cooling, for steam generation, and for wet compression. Similarly, for nuclear, either your traditional nuclear or your advanced designs, you would use it for cooling and steam. For kind of getting into the weirder technologies in terms of water usage, you would have next generation geothermal. That would be kind of your working fluid, more or less. So you have a closed system that water is running through. It's not per se as steam, but you're pumping it in a cycle. In carbon capture, you'd be using water for cooling purposes. And then in green hydrogen, you'd be using it as kind of your ingredient, your precursor, depending on what language you prefer. And then long duration energy storage, that's a really big category of technologies, but you can think of an electrochemical cell. Those really aren't using any water there are some more niche designs that might use a tiny bit of water consumption wise. So you have a pretty big gamut of kind of the different technologies and their amount of water usage. But ultimately, kind of it boils down to for use of produced water, really the focusing on the cooling. So that's your thermals, your nuclear, and then carbon capture, kind of the buckets that kind of emerge. And then whether or not produced water is valuable in terms of making those technologies more feasible is really kind of a project specific question. So it depends on the scale, it depends on the location, it depends on that specific design for that project, as well as if it's a greenfield design, a project or a brownfield design where you're maybe reusing water rights that existed for a prior technology. So is a complicated answer, I guess, is to say the least. But there maybe is potential here and there, kind of depending on exact design things. And then on the last piece of that around kind of micro turbines, all those things, yeah, there's definitely opportunities for distributed hydro writ large, whether or not it's using produced water or irrigation canals, all those things, definitely an option. Depending on the scale, that might be a more distributed resource or behind the meter resource. If it's really significant scale, it could certainly be a grid, like a more traditional grid level asset. Justin, you came off mute.
Yeah, you handle most of it. I just, when I think about, large water needs for future resources, I think, Dr. Moot's points about the different technology types and emerging tech and existing types of technologies are important. Generally, what I think about like with large scale projects, you're thinking maybe a CC, combined cycle, um, the that would be a more near term kind of solution that would need a lot of water. However, I think that there might be some challenges with those types of technologies for the New Mexico area. I think if you want to look more towards emerging tech and nuclear projects in particular are probably the one I would think of as being the highest water use case. And in those kinds of situations, I really think of large projects like that. You need a long lead time. And so if you're talking about a long lead time and making sure that you have the load growth to support that, um, out of the future, there's not near as much contractual obligation um, at that kind of lead time. So 10 to 15 years out, do you have signed agreements, contracts with load out in the field that would support that long lead time? Um, Probably not. So if you're talking about like emerging tech with large volumes of water needs and a long lead time, you're really talking about replacement generation. So there's kind of a, a cutoff point when you're thinking about these timings and the requirements and trying to make a decision on, is this going to be serving incremental load or replacement? And so I think that a large water use for emerging tech looks something like nuclear, and you're talking about some of our scenarios that we're proposing to do in sensitivities in the IRP related to nuclear options at Harrington. I think that that's probably the best kind of um, uh, situation related to that. But yeah, I think that incremental load growth with a large water use case um, probably needs a longer lead time.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Taylor. So moving on to number three, question number three on this. It's around Southwest Power Pool and some of the changes that are happening there. So the question is, what are some of the major levers that can be pulled to benefit SPS and New Mexico customers? And so um, I'll take this one, and I will say that broadly, there's been a number of parts put into works with the Southwest Power Pool that I say a little bit of patience is going to be needed for to see how they're actually going to work out, or that some additional steps are needed to be pulled on. And so some examples of that are going to be the concept around the high impact large load generation agreement concept, the HILGA concept. And so, what are some of our biggest challenges that we've had as a utility serving load in the SPS service territory over the last few years is around how quickly can we build transmission, how quickly can we build distribution, and how quickly can we get resources approved and then built. And so, what the concept around a HIL does is to allow generation to be partnered with load. And now some of those concepts, though, is although SPP has created a study process for that to be completed on their side and have it approved from a SPP perspective, it doesn't mean that we as a utility have our tariffs and everything else in place. And so that is one of the things that we're going to be working on this year is the implementation of a high impact large load uh, tariff and a direct assignment of generation concept that we're going to be working through later this year. This is different than the large load tariff that's currently in progress that we're moving forward with. But it's going to be in addition, it's going to be very focused with what the levers that Southwest Power Pool has kind of opened for us. And so that's the next step to hopefully facilitate some of that generation development. Also, one of the big ones has been just the queue challenges around generation interconnections. And so, even if folks listened to the open meeting last Thursday with the New Mexico Commission, and they talked about our generation CCN, there was comments made about the challenges with the Southwest Power Pool's queue. And the transition that Southwest Power Pool is moving toward with the consolidated planning process is studying generation and load together, hopefully to drive those generation approvals significantly faster. So then that speed to market of getting a generator put into the queue, processed, and then out of the queue with the generation interconnection agreement should be significantly faster. Now, we haven't seen that happen yet. The CPP process was just approved a few months ago. And so it's one of those things that we need to see it actually go into effect and hopefully work out the way that we have conceptually thought it was going to work. And so those are two really keys. What I'll also add here is a major hurdle is that, and it's something that SPS and actually our commissions are very actively engaged in, is the care group at the Southwest Power Pool and how that group is looking at possibly making changes to cost allocation. changes to how transmission costs, especially at the 500 and 765 kV voltage levels, and how those costs are allocated to customers is very impactful to New Mexico customers. There are conversations around maybe those who are getting the facilities at those higher voltage levels should have to pay a larger share of those costs. And we're definitely advocating that these as regional wide transmission lines should have more of a regional wide, and they have regional wide benefits. And so the cost should be regional wide. And so there's a lot of discussions on that. And so that's something that I would say Commissioner Nybert from New Mexico and Commissioner Jackson in Texas are very actively following and very concerned about on how some of these policies could have an adverse impact to development in the states that SPS serves. And I'll say that group is still working. They will be identifying any recommendations to finalize those changes until later in the year, aiming for, I think, an October or November timeline. So I would just say that we've struggled with the Southwest Power Pool for a number of years now to get some of our transmission studies completed, to make sure we have adequate generation submitted into our RFPs. I'll say that is still an ongoing challenge, but we do feel that with some of the changes that we've been advocating for the past few years, we think that in a couple more years, some of those changes will really have positive dividends. And so we're continuing to work toward those and push toward those. Moving through on to question number 4, we talked about this one a bit, but definitely open from Carrie if you feel you have more questions around water usage. We feel we kind of answered that one on number 2. And so I'm going to jump down to question number 5 about participation and subscription levels for demand response programs in SPS. And so I'm going to turn this one over to Joseph. He's in our DR team, and he will walk us through this slide that we have up. Thank you, Joseph. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, I'm Joseph Koski. I'm one of the product managers here at Xcel Energy, and I focus primarily on our commercial and industrial demand response programs. That being said, we offer more than just commercial and industrial. And so what I put together on this slide here is essentially a look at our portfolio across the SPS system. So we have a few different commercial and industrial options. We have the interruptible credit option, the load management standard offer program. We call that one the LMSOP. It's a little bit of alphabet soup. And that one's just available in Texas. Then we have a couple new tariffs that were launched in 2025. That's the Southwest Power Pool Integrated Marketplace Tariff, as well as the Off-Peak Alternate Use Rider. That Off-Peak Alternate Use Rider is also only available in Texas. And then we have our air conditioning load control programs. Specifically, that's going to be our Saver Switch, which is kind of a legacy type air conditioning control that's both available for commercial and residential customers in Texas. And then we do have our AC Rewards program that's available in New Mexico. So kind of corresponding and really answering the crux of the question here for those programs that we do have participation in so far. We put together those megawatt levels as far as what we anticipate to be on the system this summer. So particularly for the ICO, these are the loads that we have under contract today, interruptible today. And similarly with the standard offer program in Texas. And then of course, that 12.4 megawatts that you see for the air conditioning load control programs, that's what we anticipate to see in the summer or on a particularly hot day, just because it is controlling that air conditioning load. That all being said, we have a pretty new portfolio of programs. We've been seeing some pretty significant growth in the last few years, and we anticipate that growth to continue. Just to kind of frame the conversation here, the interruptible credit option was reintroduced in Texas February of 2024. So we started in 2020, 2024 at zero. So we've seen that 93.6 megawatts grow since then. And we're really forecasting that program to be a big growth driver. But then we have some developing technologies and things that we're looking forward to for some of our other programs. So growth on the horizon for sure.
All right, thanks, Joseph.
Of course.
So Margie, those are our planned responses to the questions that were submitted in advance. I don't know. Maybe I want to call on Carrie Hatley for a second there, just to make sure we met the mark for her requests for responses, and if she's had any additional follow-ups.
That was great. Thank you. No additional follow-ups for me.
Thank you, Carrie.
And Jared, before we go on to open up to other questions, perhaps there are stakeholders online who had a question about those 5 areas that were already responded to. So let's open it up. If you have a question that follows up to the 5 that the SPS team just responded to, please raise your hand so that we can have you come off mute, activate your camera, and pose any follow-up question to those 5 topics to begin with. Additional questions about those 5? Maybe it's 4 because water was addressed twice, but any other questions from the group on those topics? Sounds like you did a good job responding to those. So then let's open it up to any topic that folks might have. We put some ideas on the agenda that we sent out. We're not limited to those topics, but they include more conversation about load forecasting, about Encompass modeling, about the modeling tree and all the scenarios and sensitivities that are being planned to be looked at by the utility, anything about inputs, advanced generation and storage technologies, links with the RTO and the Southwest Power Pool, or other. So the field is open to questions from anybody who's in attendance today. So please raise your hand if you have a question on any topic that we'll hand over to the SPS team to respond to. I'll turn to my colleague, Kathy. Are you seeing anything on raised hands on the Zoom list? I haven't seen any. Have you?
No, I don't see anything, nothing in the chat either.
All right, we'll give a few more minutes. Anybody who has a question, we've got an amazing team of subject matter experts at our disposal here during this office hour. So give a couple minutes in case you want to formulate your question of the utility team. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. If anybody is having technical difficulty with raising hands, please type a note in the chat so that we can see you're interested in having something posed of the team. So we'll watch the chat here for a few more minutes and another minute or so to make sure we don't miss anybody's question opportunity.
So Margie, maybe while people are thinking, we'll just take a moment. Can we just make a little plug for next week's meeting on the 20th? Is that okay? All
Um,
right.
yeah, actually, Jared, we've got several things that we're gonna, yeah, make the plug, and we will come back to that when we close out this session today. So please go ahead, Jared.
Okay. I just wanted to turn it over to Justin Gable just for a moment, Director of Resource Planning, just to speak about what we plan to bring forth next week on the 20th. So we can do that
Thanks,
now,
Jared.
or you can wait for the end, Margie.
Let's
I
do it
saw a
now.
thumbs up.
Yeah,
All right,
let's do it.
Justin, just a little highlight for what we plan to put together for next week.
Yeah, so what we're trying to get nailed down right now is I got our IRP model built out. We're hoping that model starts spinning today. Um, so we've got all of our generic inputs for our base runs, our base load forecasting runs. So having the high forecast, which is the unconstrained planning forecast, the planning forecast, our low forecast sensitivities. We believe that we'll have the model ran a few times before the 20th. Um, it's taken longer to get our models going than we thought it would. So we should have information to review on the 20th. It might be limited to just the high level results of what we're seeing selected and things like that in the model. It will not include like our emerging tech scenarios or things like that. So um, we will we'll be working very diligently on getting that model ran, but we do anticipate getting at least those base model runs to give us the overall range from existing technologies. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And that will be good for stakeholders to get an idea of what the results look like, even from those limited number of runs. And then, of course, we'll work together to present an opportunity probably at the following workshop for more model results. But I think your modeling tree that you presented at workshop number 3 will be a great thing for folks to review again at the workshop next week to see where the runs that you've done fall into the tree and what additional analyses you're planning on doing so that we can ask stakeholders specifically if their interests are reflected in that suite of modeling run ideas. So I think that would be a perfect conversation for our workshop next week. Jared, was there anything else you wanted to add before I don't see any hands raised, so we'll give people a heads up about what things are happening in between now and next week, unless there's anything else, Jared, that you wanted to add.
The only thing I'll just add is that if people do have some additional questions, please submit them after the fact to GridWorks and through Linda Hudgens. We'll try to answer those at future meetings. And so that's the goal of the process, is the continued engagement from beginning to end. And so if people didn't have questions today, or if you're watching this recording after the fact, please email some questions and we'll get those answered at a future meeting.
Great. And you'll see in the last slide, or next to last, Deb, if you please, just next steps. This recording will be made available on the GridWorks website. I know that also SPS and on the GridWorks website are forms if anyone would like to request modeling data. There's an access form and instructions that Kathy has put those links into the chat. The system being used for sharing that data is iManage. So if you're interested in digging into additional details, that is available through there will be a confidentiality agreement for some of the materials for those who are eligible for that, but please take a look at those documents if you're interested in that. And as Jared mentioned, May 20th is our next workshop. We'll focus on understanding any model results to date And we'll also do a query of stakeholders of whether or not your interests seem to be represented in those model runs, or if you might be interested in alternative runs to be considered further in the process. As Jared also mentioned, any questions at any time, please send to both Deb Shields at Gridworks and Linda Hudgens at SPS, Excel Energy, so that we can factor those questions into discussions at the next workshop or beyond. So that is our process for managing questions. And I'd like to formally thank all the stakeholders who attended today. Thank especially ConocoPhillips, Carrie Hatley, for the great questions that you've posed since the last workshop. And finally, the entire SPS subject matter experts who've made themselves available today with great responses to the questions. And we know you have a lot of work ahead, but looks like you're got it well in hand. So thanks to everyone for being here. And with that, unless there's anything else from Jared or Justin, is there anything else from you?
Nothing else from us, Margie. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kathy has also put in chat the link to the Gridworks website where you can be able to listen to this recording or see other materials that were previously presented in workshops. So thanks again. We'll see you all on Zoom on May 20th, 9 a.m. Mountain Time for our next conversation. Thanks and have a great afternoon.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Gridworks.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.